Hello and welcome to Coffee Break, the last show of the year, and we are delighted to be here with Justin Goldstein, who is the founder and president of Press Record Communications. How are you doing, Justin?
Good. How are you, Steve? Thanks for having me.
I'm good. It's been a crazy year, and we brought in this coffee break slot to sort of provide a little light relief along the way, as well as some in-depth discussions. So, really pleased to have you on the last show of the year. Just tell us a little bit about Press Record. What do you do? And you're a big fan of the media relations space, so tell us a bit about it.
Sure. Yeah. So Press Record is a strategic media relations practice founded about a couple of years ago, and we happen to have an expertise in earned broadcast media relations. So in addition to getting those premier and strategic print online placements, we're also looking to go after TV, radio, podcast placements that work well for our clients, in addition to working on broadcast media tours, including satellite and radio media tours.
Now, yeah, media relations has become a little bit unfashionable in a way, hasn't it, in the past few years, with PR firms trying to demonstrate all the other things they can do across the spectrum. And they do that really well. But really, there's nothing that can beat a really good media relations hit, is there? And you've been seeing that more than ever during the sort of period following COVID. So tell us a bit about that.
Sure, you're absolutely right. I don't think that anything is ever going to replace being able to tell a client that you got them into the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or a great trade magazine as well. I think during this time, what my clients have found through my guidance is that it's always about thinking past the placement. And so, of course, getting the placement is great, especially if you were to get into the Times, or let's say a Today Show, if you were to get a segment there. But, anyone could tune into either piece of coverage for a brief amount of time, and then it doesn't necessarily go anywhere from that point. So I think that where clients see that added value is once they take the step to proactively use that coverage for a multitude of things. It could be, if you're filling out a speaker application to get a thought leadership speaking opportunity of some kind, or using a placement for blog content, whatever it might be. Once they start to do those things, they start to recalibrate and better understand why they're investing in a media relations program in the first place.
Are there so many practical tips you can pass on about things like, making sure the media company gives you a copy of the slot, and how you use that on social, and what you need to look out for in that respect?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you're tracking for broadcasts in particular, the first thing that you always want to try to do is politely follow up with producers, like you mentioned, to try to get a clip. The thing that I would keep in mind, though, is that every station and network has their own rules and regulations. So some producers are very easygoing about it. They'll say, we can share a clip, but it might take us a couple of weeks. Other producers will say, based on our internal regulations, we can't share anything beyond our system. So I recommend a couple of things. One is you can always record the interview on your end, ask for permission from the producer to use your own recording so that they don't have to do the legwork to go and get a recording for you, which is often half the battle. It's not even necessarily the regulations. It's more they just don't want to necessarily put in the work to get you that clip. So you can always record it on your own, whether it be your iPhone or your laptop, get the audio, ask the producer what the rules are. And oftentimes they'll say, you can use 2 to 3 minutes of a clip and just tag us online or something to that effect. There's also tracking services out there like a Critical Mention or a TV Eyes, for example, that will help to find those clips too. And what I would say is that whenever you do a radio or TV or even a podcast interview, you should definitely look into some transcription services. I know there's one out there called Temi where, if you have a short 3-minute clip or so, it could be $5 and it gives you the entire transcription. And you can use that transcription to create, again, blog posts, social posts, even use it as the basis for starting a LinkedIn article, for example. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can take those placements to get that added value.
Yeah, and it's getting a bit of extra value beyond the clip. So yeah, good tips there. Tell us about the growth in broadcast and radio coverage during COVID. I don't know if you've got any data you can share, and also maybe a couple of examples, but also why has it happened, post-COVID?
Yeah, sure. So what I've seen from different organizations that put out reporting like Nielsen or Edison Research, for example, is that traditional broadcast in particular is having a boom, right? So radio staff is growing. There were more people tuning into radio, I believe, than in prior months to COVID, simply because, people are at home more, or they're still trying to get out of the house and driving their car just to get a break. And so they're tuning in to radio for that reason, but also to get reliable, accurate information, especially on the local level. And I think during the election, that was certainly true, where local radio stations were really seen as a place of authority and a place of trust to get their news. Podcasts are certainly exploding, and that's been happening for a couple of years. I think that's only going to continue. And, it's certainly a space that will grow alongside traditional broadcasts. And I've said that, for years, broadcast has not been dying. It's been evolving. You've seen Sirius Radio pop up. You've seen podcasts start to grow. And again, TV radio is certainly growing alongside with it. And so I think that's only going to continue. In terms of examples of where I think, broadcast has worked really well, I've worked on a couple of campaigns with the PR agencies of record for organizations like the Consumer Product Safety Commission and the AARP, where they've done large campaigns. We've booked maybe 40, 50 interviews in, a week and a half. And I think that's also a testament to the value of broadcast for agencies in particular, or in-house operations, where, those print online placements could take a month to post, right? If it's a long lead story. Broadcast, you could book an interview and then you could turn that interview around within even an hour or two. And so it's a nice way to get valuable coverage. It's going to plug that hole and provide value while you're waiting for those print online placements to go live. And so those organizations and others that I've worked with have really been able to see tremendous value in a short amount of time and get their messages out and get them out to the right audience.
Yeah, I've certainly noticed my own consumption habits change with TV and other formats. And so how has that changed the world you're in? Because people are consuming at different times. You mentioned AARP, and maybe it's just my age, but I'm seeing a lot more ads for that, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's on the TV, seeing a lot of farmer ads during the day, which you wouldn't normally see because you'd be at work and you wouldn't necessarily be tracking them. People might be having the TV on in the background. So how's that impacting media relations?
Yeah, so I don't think that's really had too much of an impact. What I would say is that although the space has been fragmented, where in addition to new mediums getting stronger like podcasts, and you can even view, let's say, your local TV or national TV broadcast or your Roku device, right? Those devices still plug into or feed into these stations that are broadcasting and vice versa. So I can still go on my Roku device and see my local ABC or NBC affiliate, right? Or the Today Show. So I think the fragmentation is only providing more opportunity for viewers and listeners to go and find their reliable sources in the broadcast space. It could even be something as simple as asking your Alexa to tune into WCBS radio here in New York, right? So if anything, I think the technology is actually making it easier to find those outlets.
Tell us a bit about that local targeting, because of course it's great to get a hit on Good Morning America or whatever, but you can get a lot of value in local markets too, can't you?
Yes, absolutely. I tell this to clients all the time for a couple of reasons. One is, especially if you're a consumer brand, your job is to have a user sign up for your app for, to make a purchase, whatever the case may be. That's who's watching local TV and listening to local radio. It's the mom and dad that's getting ready for work in the morning, getting the family ready, and they're just tuning in to hear what's going on, right? So that medium, the local press, is really good for reaching those kinds of viewers and listeners that you want to take action. And the other thing that I would say is that, of course, we all want to get the Today Shows and GMAs of the world, but what often happens is, and it's not a hard and fast rule, I tell clients this all the time, but what often happens is that producers want to see prior broadcast coverage so that they can say, all right, I vetted this person, they look or sound good, they're presenting their arguments well, they have good points, good talking points. And so being able to do local media and stringing a few of them together in top markets will only help your chances to get those national placements. So that's another reason why I really encourage that people consider investing and going after local outlets.
Yep, and that's another reason to have the clips ready and use them and have them on your social channels, etc. Yeah. So talk a bit about podcasts, because there are so many podcasts now, aren't there, in every conceivable area, which is terrific. And some of them have been incredibly popular. The New York Times' daily update in the mornings. What are this? Incredible. Is it 4 million viewers now, or listeners? How do you stand out amongst the noise? Because there are so many podcasts now from a sort of earned media relations point of view.
Yeah, so I think there's two ways I would answer that. One is, it goes back to what I was saying before, which is that if you're going to take the time to do a podcast, make sure that you're using that episode after it goes live, posting it on your social channels, posting it on your website, using it to get those speaking opportunities, wherever the case may be. But I think when you're evaluating whether a podcast is valuable to invest your time into and your energy into, try to think beyond how many downloads or streams the podcast is getting, for example, right? So it's more about taking a look at, who else has been on the podcast. So if you're an author and you have other best-selling authors, or you have best-selling authors on the podcast you can align yourself with and say you're in their company, that's really, really good. Or if you're looking to make new business relationships, right? If the host doesn't do the podcast as their day job, and maybe if you're, let's say, a comms or a PR professional is looking to connect with the marketing manager, and that person is the host of their company's podcast, maybe that's a way to start a new relationship with that marketing contact, right? So it's thinking about the overall value and not just being able to say, oh, this podcast ranks like, this number in this category, or again, it's getting a lot of downloads. It's about how can I extend the value of it? And those are just a couple of ways that you could definitely do so.
How do you measure podcast traffic? Because you've got all these different channels you put it on Apple, but I don't think you can get numbers from Apple. So that might be a big channel for you, but you don't actually know really how many people you're getting. You might be on all the other channels, Spotify, whatever. But how do you actually coagulate all that together and say, this is how many people we reach?
Yeah, it's a great question. So podcast tracking is a little difficult right now. There are some sites out there like PodTrack, and that's TRAC, I believe, that do their own tracking and offer some decent information, I would say. But the Nielsen's of the world really haven't come out with a robust podcast tracking service just yet. So I think that's why it's even more important to focus on the added value of going on a podcast beyond the numbers. But what I would say is, that you could certainly look at those sites that I just mentioned as a guide. Also, you can use on Apple Podcasts, and I believe Spotify has this now. They have their own rankings of podcasts. So on Apple, for example, you could say, okay, I want to look at a podcast in the news category, and you'll see the top 20 or 30 based on Apple's metrics. They're not necessarily going to share the nuanced detail metrics of like that podcast downloads, but they can say at least this ranks number 10 in the news category. So it's just it's a guiding metric, I would say.
So what do you think, give us one of the biggest misconceptions about modern media relations, and then the biggest selling point of it?
Sure. Well, I think it goes back to what you said, which is that, we don't necessarily, and this is, sometimes what I hear colleagues in the industry say to me is that their clients say they don't necessarily see the value in putting all their budget towards it. I don't think, and you might have alluded to this, I don't think you're ever going to see a client say they don't want to do media relations at all. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but I do see them wanting to maybe take some of that budget and put it towards influencer relations. And to me, I think it's always good to have a well-rounded approach. But the value that media relations is going to provide over influencer relations, let's say, is having that third-party authority give you the validation. And I don't think you're ever really going to get that from influencers, because the whole point of influencer relations is them to promote your product, right? Whereas with media relations, you're really doing an in-depth, in some cases, an in-depth story about, let's say, your brand, and the reporter has to vet that, or you're presenting an argument about something going on in terms of trending news within your industry. Again, I don't think influencer relations is really going to do that. So if your goal is to build thought leadership and to reach an audience that is targeted, and they're going to value your opinion and also value your just overall thought process, and view you as an authority, I think there's no replacement for good media relations when it comes to that.
Okay, and just to finish up, what should we look forward to in 2021? Are there any trends you see coming around the corner, or any things that people should be available? Got a new administration. We hopefully have vaccines coming around the corner. Hopefully we'll get out of lockdown eventually. What do you see?
So I think on the media relations front, I think that there's going to be even more opportunities to connect with reporters. And I put that in quotes because I think you're seeing, for example, a lot of reporters from the traditional publications go off and start their own newsletters. You're seeing a lot more periscopes where you have people on the scene reporting on the news, or coming out with their own news broadcasts, doing YouTube live streams. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity, and I think a lot of cross-pollination between the mediums, and just more opportunity to get that authority established and connect with different authorities so you can get the value out of that.
All right, Justin. Well, thank you for joining us for the last coffee break of the year and sharing your expertise. Some fascinating stuff in there. Have a great break. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing how Press Record does in 2021.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.